go to savvyedgemarketing.com and look for Jen. Beyond that, you guys are going to be the ones that help us grow this show. And all we ask, if you like the show, make sure that you like us, subscribe to us, follow us, leave some comments wherever it is that you like to get your content. We're going to be on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, all the major channels there. But wherever it is that you find us, if you can just like us, subscribe to that channel, and maybe even leave some comments, that would be great. The best thing you could always do is share this information with your friends or family. Anybody you think is going to enjoy this content and get a lot of value out of that, we really appreciate you helping us to grow this show. So thank you so much for that. Today, again, super excited. I've got my friend here, Thomas Kaufman-O'Reilly, and he's a guy that I see all the time in the personal development school that I actually go to. It's a great school. That's where I learned a lot of my relationship skills, my integrated attachment theory program that I now help coach others on. It's through this personal development school. And I see Thomas in the webinars almost daily. And when I see him in there, he's great. He's always leaving some funny comments, or he's always asking some really great questions. The problem is, I really don't know a ton about Thomas. And so I'm really excited today to learn a little bit more about Thomas and his journey and what landed him in the personal development school. So Thomas Kaufman-O'Reilly, welcome to the My Relationship Failed podcast.
And thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate you having me on today. Well, Brian, where would you like to start?
Well, Thomas, I always like to start at the start. I always like to find out a little bit more about my guest and kind of what their journey has been, literally from the beginning. So tell us, if you don't mind, tell us a little bit about what your childhood was like growing up.
Yeah, sure. So I'm from Buenos Aires, Argentina. I was there until until I was 12 years old, and in the having to only going from learning Spanish to suddenly having to move to the United States, having to learn English, not exactly from scratch, but having to adapt to a completely different culture was a very big change for me. While I was in Argentina, I moved several times in different schools. My dad worked; he was a diplomat. And, we did have to move countries a few times. And this is kind of the critical part, which will tie into the end here, as to how I ended up in PDS. Is really where as a child, I was not able to form these sort of like really close-knit relationships because of the amount of times that I moved from one country to another, from one school to another. I was always the new kid in the class. Kids never really, and so after a while of not being able to make friends, I felt like, I was always felt excluded, and this type of attachment, style, as what would later, I would later at the end of what ended up landing me in PDS was figuring out that I did have what's called disorganized attachment, or what we call fearful-avoidant, in the school of PDS. This is just some background for you guys. So after having been in Argentina for many years, as I was explaining, we then moved to the United States because of the inflation that had happened in Argentina, which inflation there is upwards to like 50, 60, 70%. Buenos Aires is a city where about 80 to 90% of the entire country lives in one city, a city 3 times the size of New York. Just for you to have an idea of what we're talking about. The poverty level there is relatively high. We're talking about, a lot of, even though it is, so when you go visit Argentina, everybody likes like the nice places of a country, right? But there are plenty of places that they don't have even like roofs on top of their homes. You know? So as I was growing up, everybody was talking about like how great the United States was and how we really need to but that was like the United States is kind of like the hope and opportunity like around the world, or that's the message that's being sent or was sent to me. I'm a Generation X. For those of us a little bit older. But anyway, so, moved to D.C. initially in the Northwest. From there, we ended up moving to Maryland. And, after, I went to, I initially went to Radford University, and then I transferred to UMBC because I was trying to get into medical school, and I was becoming a paramedic. I worked as an EMT for several years. I discovered I just didn't really like working with individuals who were, sick. And I'm glad that I figured that out when I did, because I was young and I was able to course correct. And, I was able to, I've been through a lot of different jobs, which is another thing that would also play into the attachment style. So the attachment theory and concepts will revolve at every single stage of my life. I just never knew it at the time. And so I went from one job to the next to the next. I worked for debt reconsolidation. I worked for Visa credit card, as a customer service rep. And then eventually, I made some pretty poor financial decisions with some credit cards.
Yeah.
Ended up having to move back home.
Yeah.
And I took on like 3 jobs to pay off the credit cards because I wasn't in a lot of debt. And then after that, I remember sort of what ended up happening, or the way then, I would eventually open up my own dog training business. But before that, sort of what was happening is I was translating for the government, and I was starting to develop a carpal tunnel with my wrist, and my doctor was like, "Dude, you got to change jobs." He just told me. So at the time, I'd also gained quite a significant amount of weight, and I actually dropped like 30 or 40 pounds simply by training. I started out walking dogs, and when I began walking dogs, I began taking classes over at Catch Academy, which is I believe it's in New Jersey, and it's an online program. And through there, they sort of helped me out, kind of get my feet wet in dog training. And, in the same way that I'm going to backtrack just a little bit. So there was before I did leave this part out, which was after I left from Radford University, I went to the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. And then after that, I actually ended up going to culinary school for a period, and finished culinary school. Was a chef for 3 or 4 years, and then after that, that's when I got into the credit card debt. That's what brought me to Maryland, and
So you had quite a journey.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I want to make sure that I don't leave anything out, because this type of what I'll wind up learning about myself is that this consistent type of movement from one job to the next, to the next, to the next, you'll start, everything is your attachment to yourself first, and then to the outside world. And so, then after, well, I mean, I'm not trying to take up too much of the time, but eventually, what'll wind up happening is, I ended up opening up my own dog training company, and here we are, and so me and you met. So I had initially heard about attachment theory.
So hold on.
Okay,
Let me backtrack
sorry.
a little bit, because
Sure.
first of all, I can totally relate with the moving from town to town or city to city. That was my journey as well, right? And so, through that childhood, right, we're developing patterns and different ways that we see the world, and you kind of see it like me in that regard, because we
Yeah.
went through that similar experience. And so, and we talked about a little bit of attachment there. We'll talk about that maybe a little bit later here. But the idea is that tumultuous childhood, if you will, that moving around a lot, the instability really begins to create the patterns in our lives. And like you were saying, that pattern even develops into our jobs, our careers, our relationships, really kind of starts to, form, and really begins the pattern of how we're living our lives as adults.
Mm-hmm.
Without getting too deep into it, give me a quick synopsis of what was it like for you when you started to get into the dating world, and it started to have some relationship with the opposite sex, wanting to learn how to have good relationships and maybe find that mate. What was it like for you dating wise?
Yeah. Well, I want to let you know that throughout high school, I never had a single girlfriend.
Yeah.
And not just that, but I was massively rejected by women. And when I was rejected by women, I just, it would hit me so hard, and I can never really, I was always had thoughts like, what's wrong with me? Why doesn't anybody like me? Or, God, there must be something fundamentally wrong about myself. And, luckily for me, I ended up, I've been in therapy since I was very, very young. And, the part of what got me into therapy was, me failing, several exams and then figuring out that I had ADHD. And they were like, well, you can't focus. And, we're getting a little bit off topic. The rejection sensitivity dysphoria hits very hard for people who have ADHD. And, so a rejection isn't just like, I just don't feel like going out on a date, which is how most normal people would would take it.
Yes.
No,
So when you're getting rejected, you're feeling pain at a level that's like,
it is
on a level scale of 1 to 10, you're feeling it on a level 30.
It's
right?
like somebody ripping off your arm. It really is. And so and I'm not sure. I mean, that might be, it could just have been my age or whatever. But I would get into these situations where I was absolutely obsessed over one person. And then absolutely obsessed over it. And, eventually when I began figuring things out about myself, both at a neurochemical level as well as psychologically and, all that stuff. But I want to talk a little bit more about relationships here. So after high school, I ended up, my first girlfriend I met I was not part of a fraternity, but I was at a frat party. And this girl that I met was amazing, and I think the first ones always are.
Right.
The
first love,
are always the ones that leave the best mark for you. And me and her, we dated for 3 years. It was just a wonderful relationship. And then I ended up leaving Radford to UMBC, University of Maryland, Baltimore County. And me and her, we still stayed in that relationship, even though it was long distance. We eventually, we had to break up. The distance just wasn't, we just couldn't make it. And then, and then from there, I began dating really sort of, I had no idea what I was doing when I was dating. I really didn't, and everything was trial by fire. I have an older sister that is from a previous marriage that my dad had, or a stepsister, I should say. And then I have a younger brother. But dating and relationships were not anything I didn't have an older brother that said to sit down with me and be like, hey, this is how.
So were you finding it easy to meet girls, but just having a hard time once you got involved in the relationship, or was it just difficult all around? Like the whole experience was just a challenge.
Ironically, I never had a real hard problem being where women are. Because it's a relatively easy thing. You can sign up for now that I'm older, but I think you do meet people through either activities that you guys have in common or mutual friends. There is no other way that I know of. It's either common interests, like for example in college, you're all taking classes together. And after college, I remember I was playing the drums, I was in a band. Meet plenty of people that way, if you're a musician. And just a lot of, so
you were having a hard time. Were you having a hard time getting really good relationships with that? Did you find when you did get in relationships, it was kind of challenging the entire time?
Sure. I found my relationships to be very almost overtly, or this is when I began learning about hookup culture and, where everything was just sort of, the equivalent for me was just I have no other way to express my feelings verbally, so therefore I want to express it physically, and so that ended up in many, many relationships where I was just and ended up, hooking up with someone who I liked, and then because things just moved so fast, then suddenly I was in a relationship that I did, or or I'm looking back on it, I kind of wish I would have thought about it further, or stuff like that.
So you found
But
yourself in a relationship that you don't really want to be in. Is that what I'm heard
yeah,
there?
exactly.
But
Yeah,
did you have a hard time getting out of it at that point? Was it that
yeah.
now I'm in
It
it, but
really
I
is hard
I don't
because
really want to be in it?
yeah, and so you wind up in the situation where you don't want to hurt the other person because that was never your intention. Your intention is always actually that you really care about the person, but because you're so nonverbal, you're so not that you're nonverbal that you can't communicate, but you just don't know how to express your feelings in that, in that regard,
And
right? Because
that
on
fear
the
of,
one
like you said,
hand,
that fear of hurting somebody, right? Like, that
yeah,
fear of feeling bad about the fact that I may hurt this person. But the truth is, in that regard, it's hurting both parties at that point. But not being truthful to ourselves and having that courage to step
hmm
up and tell that other person, hey, I love you, I care about you, but I don't think we're right for each other. A lot of
yeah,
times, and I've done the same thing you're talking about there. Absolutely. We end up staying in relationships way longer than we probably should be. And we've spent a lot of our time, as we look back, it sounds like you're similar to me in that regard, where we can look back and say, man, I wasted a lot of years, in
sure,
relationships, that I shouldn't have been in, and ultimately kind of again hurt both parties. That person didn't have that time to move on as well, and maybe find the person that was better for them at that time. But again, we learn through this experience. We learn as we get older through that. What we didn't
yeah,
know then, it's we can forgive ourselves for. But it's funny
right.
to look back and
That's
see that, right? Yeah.
Yeah, it is. It is a very, very hard lesson, and it's not a lesson that comes easy because it is one of these things where like you just hit your head against the wall. You hit. I mean, this is what happened with me.
Yeah. Yeah.
But nobody ever sat down and said to you know what, this is not how adult relationships function. And the worst part about it is it's not so much. So you start having, or at least I began having a lot of inner conflict and feelings because on the one hand, I actually do care about the person that I sleep with. I actually do really love, at least for that time, or at least you think you're in love with that person. And then, and that may continue for some time. But, regardless as to however long that takes, the understanding that wait a minute, you don't actually know two people. You don't know yourself and you don't know the other person. And many times the other person doesn't even know themselves, right? So it's quite the situation. You have two people who don't even know who they
Yeah.
are, and now they want to go ahead and try to establish a relationship. And these are the individuals who you see down the line will get married. They have all kinds of problems. Later on, they have nothing to talk about. Then they have kids. Then they like the whole thing. I mean, it's
Yeah.
just a mess. So I mean, I am extremely. I feel lucky in a way that I was able to make the amount of mistakes that I did at the time that I did. Now, would I, if I had to go back to a younger self, I don't think. I mean, I am. I'm not exact. So there was a period of my life where I mean, man, there was a lot of. As men, we are pressured and told by our peers and our like social media, not social media because back then there was no social media, but um, we are really pushed. Society really pushes us to just want sex, not relationships, and just want more sex. That's
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Like we're
I
not
think a lot of
we're
us guys were never really taught how to have real relationships or how to be real men and how to be, yeah, like how to do it right. And so if you were fortunate enough to have that dad who was able to show you that, God bless you.
yeah,
But I think
exactly.
for most of us, even the ones who have fathers that are around, I had friends growing up that had parents that were together, but their parents were also somewhat dysfunctional sometimes, and they had
Yeah,
their own issues in that regard. So,
absolutely.
so even just being there isn't always the case. I think it's very rare, probably more rare than we'd like to think, where you have a really great mom and dad that both kind of have their act together and really are able to
It
show
is
their children
strange.
how to do it right. So I want to know though. Let's talk to me about the relationship that ultimately challenged you the most. That ultimately maybe led you into the personal development school. Tell me about that
Sure.
relationship. What did that look like?
So the pattern that I was seeing is my first relationship, and I'm I don't involve. I'm not going to go into names, but the very first relationship that I had was the best relationship that I had, and every relationship after that
The one that
was
got away.
worse and worse
Uh,
and worse until eventually my last relationship, I was just like, it was a relationship where I had met someone, slept with them too fast, and this relationship, it really should have just been done in like a month, but the guilt of me, I would always be gaslighting myself into being like, well, if I'm just I've had so much therapy and I'm so psychologically healthy, maybe I can guide her or help her, or like, or I can, or, I'm not enlightened. I would say things like, I'm just not enlightened enough.
Yeah,
And if I was only a better person myself,
right.
because if like attracts like, then as I improve my life, she's going to be improving her life, or any kind of weird justification that I could come up with,
Yeah.
or
So
I'll get
you were
a
trying
help
to work
coach.
through this, even though you felt like it should have been over early on. You
Very
didn't want
early
to let
on.
it go. You thought, oh, let me give it a shot here, see if we can work through the
Yeah.
situation and the problem. How long did you guys end up, being together?
Oh man, 4 years. Yeah,
Oh,
and this
wow.
was
So
a relationship.
you went from a relationship that should have been over in 1 month.
Yeah,
You ended up staying in that relationship
yeah.
for 4 years. I can somewhat relate to that.
Hmm.
I have a girl that I dated when I was younger, wonderful girl, and we're still great friends today. But yeah, early on in the relationship, probably within the first 6 months or so, I felt like we were more good friends than just a deeper relationship. But through the situations of life, I wound up staying in that relationship for almost 5 to 6 years myself. So I totally
I
relate to that.
I will tell you that the fear of being single and the fear of being alone is absolutely brutal, but mostly because you don't know it's because you don't have a good relationship with yourself. And you will do anything and everything to not have to ask yourself these really hard existential questions. And there's no one's going to get out of those questions. And no relationship is going to help you figure that out. It doesn't matter if it's a therapist, it doesn't matter if it's a girlfriend. I've dated some women who are just, that's the other thing that society really pushes you to do is you have to date a woman who just looks like a trophy wife or something like that, you know? And at the end of the day, it really doesn't matter the amount of like numbing that you do, whether or not it's through dating, like sex, drugs, alcohol, everything that, you know, there are just some things that one as a person cannot avoid. And spending time with yourself and getting to know yourself can be so hard, especially when you may not like the answers that you might get.
Yeah.
And many times for most of us, if you have CPTSD or any kind of other mental illnesses, then you live a life where you're dealing with your inner demons, and at the same time you have to deal with the practical aspects of everyday life, and that's what people don't get. Are the struggles that people have internally versus the struggles that people, you know, have to do with your boss, your parents, your friends, whatever. That's one struggle. And the other struggle is you with yourself.
Well, I
And
find that that struggle starts with us, right? I feel like
absolutely.
it's mostly with us, and once as we begin to learn more about ourselves, we begin to heal more on our own. We begin to learn how to handle those relationships outside of ourselves better, right? So if I'm struggling
Absolutely.
with the relationship to myself, then yes, every other outside relationship is also going to struggle. As I begin to heal, as I begin to become the man that I need to be and have more skills and learn more about me
Yeah.
internally, I'm able to begin to have healthier relationships with those outside people. Now, some are easier than others, right? Based upon how healthy or unhealthy they might be. But without me being healthy, it's impossible to have any healthy relationships because it always starts with me. I'm always in the relationship, regardless of who else we're talking about outside of
Yeah.
here, right? So, yeah. So let me ask you this though. So, how
Sure.
did that relationship end? And then, how did you ultimately come into the personal development school where you and I are both a
Sure.
part of today? How did that happen?
Yeah. So the relationship that I had with this individual, the last one that lasted for 3 or 4 years, maybe five, who knows, was really this. It really, every single time I would see her, my gut would hurt. Or every single time I was driving over to her place, I was like, why am I doing this? or I would be hoping that my car would break down as I'm driving there, or all things that, like, I'm like, why am I doing this to myself? And the question kept on being like, well, eventually you'll find somebody new. Let's just keep on dating her until we find somebody new. But what I came to realize is that she would put me in such a negative state that it was just impossible for me to, like, go out and meet someone new. Like, you can't hang on to the past and want something new. I couldn't. Maybe some people can. It's called
Right. Yeah.
monkey
Some people
wrenching.
can. Right.
But I don't. I can't do it. I don't have either the mental bandwidth or the skills. Either way, I can't do it, and I don't think I should. I don't think it's a good thing. I think people need breaks in between
So
relationships.
how did that relationship end? Tell me. I'm anxious. I want to hear
Yeah,
that.
sure. We got into a huge fight. We both share a dog. We raised a dog together, and she would leave the dog out in very cold weather. I had told her to not do that several times, and the relationship was really one where we would talk over one another. She didn't understand what I was trying to communicate to her. I didn't understand what she was communicating to me. That alone should have ended the relationship, but I kept struggling and trying to get it to go. It really ended with me just saying enough is enough. I blocked the number, and I had already told her several times that this had to end, that we had nothing in common, and she just could not get it through her head that this relationship had to end, and I had to finish things off, unfortunately, because when you tell someone over and over and over and over that this relationship is not going to succeed and that we should go ahead and be friends, and even when we tried being friends, I still couldn't be with her, even as friends. And that's when I knew, you know what, this is done. Like, if you can't even be friends with someone, if they're just intolerable to you. I mean, this might change,
Yeah.
down the
Right. Yeah.
line.
But at the time,
But
sure.
at the time, I was just like, and she still reaches out to me, or she'll leave me a message and stuff like that. But
But you were done.
I,
That was it.
yeah,
So
that was pretty much.
is that how did you end up landing into the personal development school? Is that what kind of was the
Yeah,
final blow that kind of brought you there?
yeah. Not. I mean, so I've always been interested in sort of, like, who am I as a person, as at a deeper fundamental level, and I spent a lot of time thinking about, like, what are we doing here as people? Why do we think we're so much better than other animals and trees and stuff like that? I spent a lot of time, I really enjoyed philosophy. I do tend to think a lot about things. Just, I was big into, I really like the movie What the Bleep Do You Know? It talks a lot about how everyone's interconnected. And I've always been a very empathetic person, and that actually ended up working against me when I was in these relationships where I couldn't break out, where I couldn't leave, because I felt like, and so then I would end up learning that that's something called codependency and enmeshment, and all of these terms were new to me. I didn't know anything about this stuff. And, a lot of people, they go to therapy and they think, oh, I'm just going to be therapized, and it doesn't work that way. A therapist isn't going to fix your problems. They might support you on your way. They might give you, like, they may, if you're lucky, they might give you a few steps to take, but
Yeah, you definitely have to find the right therapist for
yeah,
you that really moves the needle. I do think there are different modalities out there. There's a
absolutely.
slew of different types of therapies out there, and unfortunately, you're right. Sometimes the wrong therapy doesn't move the needle as quickly as needed, and you can find yourself going to therapy sometimes for many many years,
Yep.
and still feel trapped in that old self and still
Yep.
struggling to move the needle.
Yeah.
I always say be open to trying different modalities though, and don't be
Yeah.
afraid to move to maybe a new
Mhm.
therapist, if you are finding that
Yeah.
happening, look for a different modality. There are some exciting ones, and we're going to be talking to some exciting therapists along the way. So we're going to learn more
Yeah.
about those modalities out there. But what do you like about personal development school? What do you think about
Yeah.
that? And what are you
So
learning in
the
there
great
that seems
thing,
different maybe than what you've learned before?
yeah. So I heard about PDS through YouTube. I initially became interested in attachment theory. I was my initial, like, contact with the self help world through YouTube was Lisa Romano. and so she does a lot of work with
Codependencies.
children's of Alcoholics Anonymous, or COA, and then that led me to Heidi Pre. She did attachment theory, and then that ended up leading me to Thais Gibson, who is the founder of the PDS. And I've always felt like, I've always agreed with Freud, and that the subconscious is the sort of the key to healing our everything. Um, that being said, attachment theory is a lens by which everybody in the school is, this is how everybody in the school, goes through this lens of attachment theory. And attachment theory really is perhaps like the most basic core things. And it's really talking about, no, I don't get into too much detail, but it's following everything that we know as far as subconscious programming. There's a lot of different things that where PDS is combining several different types of therapies. Everything from CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, with some things that are with a type of a hypnosis sort of back. I mean, it's not hypnotherapy, but it's using the same type of idea behind hypnotherapy, which is we're going to go ahead and try to get to the root of the problem, which is where we learn about the BTEA concept model, which is behaviors that leads to thoughts, that leads to emotions, that eventually leads to actions. These are the 4 steps that we take in order to change, or this is the model that we're taught to change. And then from there, we go ahead and we basically you become aware of your actions. Then you become, so what emotions led to that action?
Yeah.
What thoughts led to the emotion, and
Right.
what was the belief
We begin to
that led
backtrack that.
to the whole thing? And so then you have to go through and think. They give us that list of the core beliefs. There are 21 or 22 core beliefs that we have. That some of them overlap, some of them don't. And when you go through, and our goal here is to find 10 counterexamples of the core root belief. Now, this type of thing, it takes 21 days to develop a new habit, to go ahead and reprogram. It's important to understand that we're not actually reprogramming what we're doing. We are actually opening up a different way that is connecting. Instead of going one way, of believing something, you're actually going to start believing something different.
Yeah. So what you're doing is you're basically reprogramming a lot of these core wounds, and kind of, getting through the healing process, taking that core wound, let's just say feeling unsafe or maybe feeling unloved, and where that's on automatic pilot in the subconscious realm, you're now reprogramming through this exercise to teach yourself that you are lovable, that you are loved, that you are you are safe, you are okay, and through that programming, that's one of the elements that I love about it. Absolutely, the subconscious was a big one for me when I learned about that. That was a game changer for me. I love the 6 core elements that Thais talks about. Of course, your core wounds, your boundaries, your core wounds, your needs, your emotions, your boundaries, your communication, and then your behaviors. That's what I loved most about the school, is that I got 6 different elements that I could really focus on, that could begin to move the needle. And as I begin to get better at each one, I really found for me that moved the needle for me, and it's really been a game changer. Let me ask you this: what do you think, as far as the personal development school? What do you think the most valuable thing you've learned in that school is so far?
So for me, the BTA is a circular, cyclic thing where we don't just end up with our actions. So you might, depending on your amount of information that you know, so there are some things that, for example, before I learned hypnosis, I had learned NLP, and NLP is, there's a lot of like visualization. What would you like things? How would you like to feel about things? You visualize things, and then you know, and I'm not trying to, like, I see that inside the school, there is a lot of, so when I talk about the BTEA, what's really there in DBT, there's something called opposite action. It's a technique, and opposite action means that we're going to go ahead and do the reverse, the exact opposite of what you intend to do. So for me, going out and meeting people was very, very scary. It was scary, and to go out and meet people in a new town where I didn't know anyone. And so I had to force myself and will myself, because in my brain, every single thought is, don't go out. You're a loser. Nobody's going to want to talk to you.
The subconscious.
And you have to override that voice. You have to know that that voice is going to be there all the time. So you have to grab your keys. The voice is like, you look like garbage. No one's going to want to talk to you. You have to open up the door to leave to the car. In the car, you turn on the engine. What if the car breaks down as you go there? Who are you going to call?
Negative thoughts along the way.
You get to you park your car. Oh, you don't have enough money. You're not going to, the bouncer probably isn't even going to let you in. All lies, by the way.
Yeah, right. It's all the subconscious lies, right?
And, it's funny. And then you get into the bar. They're like, it's a bar. You don't really drink. Why are you even here? All the stuff.
Yeah.
And you're fighting all of it all the time. So from the moment that when you make a decision, you have to be so determined to go against that action. And then what ends up happening, the way I do it anyways, for the BTEA, is that at the end of the BTEA, you start having a different belief. Like, you can do this. You really can go to the bar and override every single thing that's happening.
So do you find the work you've been doing is beginning to make a difference?
Absolutely, 100%. 100%. Now, do I do it the way, do I do the 21 days of reprogramming and stuff like that? I am slowly beginning to, so part of me, I have two problems. One is I'm not very consistent at much of anything, and I have no problem admitting that. And it's a weakness. I'm working on it. And because when somebody says 21 days, I'm like, so I'm like, if I'm consistent with 3 days in a row.
You're not working the program perfectly, right? And
exactly.
Which a lot of us in there don't, right? It's not about being perfect in there. I feel like you can get so many benefits, even if you just do 50% of, what's needed to be done, right? Obviously, the better we can do, the more we can maybe move the needle. But at the end of the day, it's moving the needle regardless of yourself sometimes. And
I will say that being aware alone of your core wounds has changed my life incredibly. Even if you don't do any reprogramming at all, you being aware of, like, when you're being misunderstood, that's a core wound. If you're feeling like you're not good enough, that's a core wound. If you're feeling unworthy, that's a core wound. If you're feeling, I'm not going to go through all the core wounds.
Yeah, no, so absolutely. No, I agree.
Being aware.
Awareness is the first step, right? So as we become more aware of the issues, that is really the first step, is to realize and recognize that, wait a second, this is my own insecurity kind of being triggered here in this moment, which is then causing me to maybe act in different ways that I don't even want to act like. And that's where that subconscious, train, if you will, is becoming a train wreck, because the subconscious brain is pushing us in ways that are unhealthy. So as you begin to work on that, heal that, improve it, and again, it starts with the recognition. Now, all of a sudden, instead of that fear coming up at a level 10, it slowly begins to come up at maybe a level 8, maybe a level 7, getting healthier, getting better. And maybe now it's down to a level 1 or 2, where I still may feel a little bit, but now it's so much easier to kind of cope with it, deal with it. I recognize it, and I don't have to act upon that. And now I'm able to kind of change everything that I'm doing in there. So yeah, I love that. I agree, man. There's so many good things in there. I'll tell you that the program itself has been a game changer for me. Let me ask you this real quick. We're getting a little short on time. How long have you been in the school?
I think, wow. I mean,
has it been that long?
I've lost track of time.
Okay.
It's my understanding, I think about 6 or 7 months now.
Okay.
The intensity at which I tend to be a pretty intense and passionate thing, where I dive in head first about
Yeah,
anything that
I
I
see
do.
you there all the time, so I know that you're there
Yeah.
a lot, like myself. Yeah, absolutely. We dive in.
I do think that having the fearful avoidant, you're learning, you have to, so if you were just avoidant, that's like, okay, you can kind of get away with only the avoidance side of things. And if you're anxious, you can learn about the anxious side of things. But when you have, you know, the mixture of the two, then you really have to go out of your way to learn all three, attachment. And I really do think that people should learn all
Yeah,
three.
I find that it's valuable regardless. I feel like even if you discover that you're one way, it's so invaluable to learn the other attachment styles that are out there because you could see that in your partner. So even,
Yeah.
you may recognize that, okay, I lean more, fearful avoidant, or I lean more anxious preoccupied, but I notice my spouse or the partners that I'm choosing, maybe if I'm not even in a relationship currently, I'm noticing that a lot of my spouses are more that dismissive avoidant, and I can now recognize their triggers, their ways of doing things, and that knowledge can be a game changer when you're in relationships, because that was my wife and I, right? She was leaning dismissive, I lean anxious, and when the way she handles and processes things is so different from my way, that's why we were triggering each other a lot, and a lot of times those triggers would, because of the differences, were just taking us in such a terrible direction, if you will. But learning that and becoming aware of that was the first step, and that's how I came across Thais Gibson's work. Is that awareness of that alone began to become a game changer. And then as I added all these other things in there, and continued to heal the process and learn more about myself, learn more about the other attachment styles and the way other people process sometimes, that was just such a game changer. Hey, I really want to do that. I'd love to chat some more. We're getting a little bit low on time. Give me a suggestion. What would you say to anybody right now who's been struggling their whole life? Somebody who's been,
Sure.
they're in a
I would
relationship and
say,
struggling with it all. What kind of words of wisdom would you
yeah.
would you like
So
to?
my first words of wisdom would be to understand that, um, so when a person has CPTSD and PTSD, and you know, I would like them to understand that saying no always led to a sense of feeling unsafe. So every disagreement that you have with someone that triggers an emotional reaction is based on a childhood feeling of you not feeling safe. And this type of this is not just an idea. This is a visceral sensation that you feel. So when you people please, when you ignore your own feelings, when you self-abandon, when you're in these codependent relationships, when you feel like you have to hold your tongue, it's because you learned at a very early age that saying no was meant, and it created chaos in your family, and that was not your fault. So that would be the very first thing to understand, is that the body keeps the score. And it is so incredibly disheartening, and at the same time hopeful. But it is when you look back on your life and you have to say that, that in a disagreement with someone meant that you were unsafe as a child. That for me changed absolutely everything, because what it really did is it dialed down the intensity of, because I used to get into these, first I would stonewall, and then I would keep things in, and then one day I would just explode. And so, and why did I do this? Because I was scared. I was scared of having that hard conversation. It's not easy. We're asking us to override something that is so embedded within us. So that would be the very first thing that I would tell someone. The second thing I would tell someone is to trust your body. Your body is talking to you all the time. Do not ignore your body, because your body is telling you what it is, how you're feeling. So, in my case, when I'm feeling anxious about something, and I know this is a conversation, I can talk about this for. I still have time. We can keep going for a good 10 minutes if you want. But I want to let you know that that was the very most interesting thing. And then the other thing is I noticed that the pattern of thinking that I actually had to write it down. The cycle of my thoughts, right? So it would go something like, I'm scared, like, the action is, something along the lines. Let's just take the example of me wanting to go out and not being able to go out. Well, why are you so scared about going out? It's because, you've been rejected so hard in the past, and you've been bullied, and these are all things that the fear center is gathering. We have
all those
three
negative,
reactions.
yeah.
We have our freeze response, our flight response, and our fight response. And, if you were punished physically as a child, as most of us from a certain generation were, parents, you didn't always get a timeout. You were, not saying you, but I, was severely, like, me and my brother were not allowed to say the word no. So, as a default, we learned that everything was a yes. So everything had to be accepted. Everything had to be like, we accept nonviolence. We accept everything that's bad or good or whatever. Oh, can you take me to the airport? Oh yeah, sure, no problem. Even though you don't have money to get gas.
So you just became a people pleaser and unable to
Exactly.
say no for yourself and stand up for yourself. Yeah.
And the everything is being controlled by the fear center in your brain, which is it's so unfortunate.
And that's in the subconscious realm, right? So until we really tap into that and recognize that that's really, really what's going on here,
It is absolutely
you're going to
100%.
continue down those patterns, right? And I did the same, right? I think we all do, right? Until we become aware of that and recognize that, the subconscious is really driving this because, consciously I want to do one thing, but I find myself subconsciously continuing to do things that I don't even really want to do. And then when you finally become aware of that and recognize that, that's when you can begin the healing process. Yeah.
I also want to make it a point, and I think this is a very important point, is that a lot of the things that we learn a lot of it can be pre-verbal. So we don't even understand where we get it from. And don't get me wrong, how we grow up, all that is valid. If you were to follow Erickson's model, and I don't want to get into like the different types of therapies, but it is, I think, crucial for people to understand. Just to read, you don't even have to be, let's get a book on DBT for dummies. Get a book on, inner child, inner child healing. Understand the different concepts, Adler psychology. Adler is a person who believes that we choose our feelings to go ahead and help. We defend our trauma. We defend the way we are because we don't want to we don't want to go outside of our comfort zone because
we've learned those to really protect ourselves, right? And so we've developed these survival skills, if you will, in that subconscious realm, and these subconscious thoughts and behaviors that we're doing have served us to protect us growing up as children. But now they're really not protecting us anymore. They're actually now doing the damage and causing the problems. But until we tap into that awareness, we're going to continue that pattern.
I don't want to push back on that. But it's not just protection. It's also understanding. We are trying to understand why is it, because there are certain things that, they helped us at a certain point. But we are talking about what's really called childhood logic. And I think that inner child work is absolutely 100% imperative for people to know. So, I love the process of what we learn at the school. Everything from the emotional processing tool to the BTEA. And, I do I do think that there are some things that I wish that we would touch on a little bit more. I think detachment is something that we could, and this is not a critique, by the way. This is all I'm saying is that,
Yeah, yeah, of
you know,
course.
if I were to add things to the program, I think being able to see things from an observer's point of view, for me, detachment and not getting so caught. Now, granted, so much easier to do when you're single, you know,
Yeah.
and see the relationships from now. But when you're in a relationship and things are happening in real time, that's when you're putting your feet to the fire, you know. And that is when things are no longer theory. That is when things are very, very real and very, very your the fear centers and everything that's happening subconsciously is being put to the test. And you can go around thinking you're enlightened, you understand everything. Yeah, you might think that you understand everything.
Yeah, consciously.
Yeah, and yeah, subconsciously, consciously, whatever. But until you are in a relationship, and this is one of the reasons why I stayed in a relationship was, I want to test how well I'm doing, like learning all this, you know, new information by, you know, being with somebody who was triggering. Now, that being said, although, yeah, I was able to handle things much better, I don't want to be continuing, like, there's no there's a saying that says you don't have to stand out in the rain without an umbrella, you know? And this is an important concept that I think that not too many people get. You don't have to be in a bad relationship, but the problem is that you will continue being in a bad relationship. It's just, as Dispenza says, you will just have the same relationship but with a different face. The person's just, you know, you need to change internally.
Completely.
And this is what people do not get. And the amount of effort and the amount of work and the amount of time that it takes to go from point A to point B to really realize that you can change. And I think a big part of me for a long time didn't believe that you could change, you know?
That's the first step is realizing that we need to change, right? I always say that number one, the thing that started my journey and my wife's journey was the fact that we both realized that we needed to change. She challenged me to see a therapist because she thought I had all the issues. I challenged her to see a therapist because I thought she had all the issues. What we found is we both have our own issues, and so that
Absolutely.
was the beginning of the healing work to be able to look at ourselves and say, the healing begins here. And we're not pushing these problems off on our spouse. We have to look at how we're showing up. And when we do that and we begin to take ownership of that, that's when we really begin to heal. That's when we begin to change. And that's when we can ultimately put ourselves in a better position to have that healthy, great relationship with our partners. Now, whether it's our current partner or whether it's a future partner, that can be determined as we go, but the key is to learn the skills, learn the tools, do the healing so that we can put ourselves in that position. And until we do, you're right, we're going to continue to find ourselves in similar type of relationships. We're just putting a new face on it, a new perfume on it, and sending it out there as if it's changed, and it hasn't. So I love that concept. That was a game changer for us. It's certainly one that I challenge everybody is to stop pointing the finger the other way, start pointing it at yourself and take that ownership.
I I do want to I do want to emphasize the idea of IFS, which is internal family systems,
Yeah, it's great
where
stuff.
you have different parts of you that are conflicting with one another. And that same conflict is happening outside of you at the same time. And these are different parts of you that they are literally, they are, they have to feel safe enough to come to an agreement among each other, which is a different type of modality. Now, I realize that we're talking about PDS. PDS is a wonderful, wonderful. I would advise anyone and everyone to go ahead and join the group. But that does have to be done with an idea that you do have to do the work. You can you can join the group. We have a social hour, and for me, I mean, I gotta be honest with you, I love the people
Yeah,
in
absolutely. It's a great group of people.
yeah.
We're all on the same mission, that same journey of healing and trying to understand and learn from each other and grow from each other. And it's a really great community. I always say that also that it doesn't have to be the only outlet that you do for healing. You can absolutely continue to go to some therapy, do some other modalities that can also work in conjunction with this program. So it's not about giving up the old program. This could be just adding to what you're currently doing and that extra push, which is what my personal experience was. I was seeing a therapist as well as my own spiritual journey, as well as adding the personal development school. And as I began to do all those together, that was the home run. I really began to make sense. And the personal development school kind of brought it all together and gave me those skills that I never had before. Like I said, I truly believe that many of us, we want to and we desire so much to have healthy, good relationships, but we were never taught how to do it. And we go through life thinking we think we know, right? Or we know we don't know, but we don't know how to even figure that out at that point. And so we just go through life, hoping that this one's going to work out, doing the same mistakes. We have no tools, no skills. Nobody taught us how to do that. This school has given me tools. And as I've learned now, I now have skills. No, I have tools now that we can do that actually move the needle. I know how to set boundaries. I know how to communicate differently. I understand my own emotions on a different level. I begin to heal those core wounds, right? As I begin to do each of those elements, it's been a game changer for me internally, my life. My wife and I, when we were separated, I didn't do this work to get her back. I did it to get myself back. And ultimately, as I got myself back, that was the part that helped bring her back as well. And so as fate would have it, that kind of worked out for us in that regard. But at the end of the day, I had actually gotten to a point where I was okay no matter what happened. I was okay if we worked it out. I was okay if we didn't. I'm glad it worked out the way it did, but I'd gotten to the point where I was okay either way. And I think that's the place we all maybe want to get to, where we can just be okay with or without. And I always say that love attracts. Love doesn't try to trap or manipulate. Love is the ability to say, I absolutely love this person, I'm happy if they choose me and choose to be in my life, but I'm also just as happy for that person if they choose to not be in my life and to walk the
Good.
other way. And when we get to that point, that's when true love can happen. And so I think that's been my
I love
goal,
that.
been my experience. And so that's where I go today. And I think that's where I like to get everybody. Hey, Thomas, man, I could chat all day. I know you got to
Yeah,
run
me
as
too.
well.
I want
This,
to.
this
Yeah,
has been an absolute pleasure. Again, I'll give you a
me
last
too.
statement and then we're going to say goodbye to the
Yeah,
audience.
sure. The very last statement was that I joined PDS really looking for a relationship, but what I really ended up figuring it out is what I was really looking for was a relationship with myself.
Absolutely.
And so if you're struggling out there and you think it's because of a relationship, it's not because of a relationship. It's because you don't have a relationship with yourself. So those would be my parting words.
I love that. Absolutely. I 100% agree with that. The relationship starts with us, and then that spills out into all the other relationships we have. And that's been a game changer for me too. So, Thomas, this has been a lot of fun, man. It was really great to get
Brian,
to know
thank you
you.
so
Yeah.
much for having me over.
Yeah.
I appreciate your time, and this is such an important message to get out there. And this is not so much. First of all, I'm not getting paid by PDS. This is not an endorsement of any kind.
We think you're
And
getting paid because all the good questions you ask in
yeah,
there. It's good to know you're
yeah,
not
no,
yeah,
that's
on
yeah.
the
We do have a
payroll.
current
Yeah,
joke around the
that's
community
right.
that says that I get paid because of the good questions, but
That's right.
um, these are the questions that I ask in PDS are really meant for self-reflection. It has nothing to do
Now
with
you always ask some really great questions in there, and it's just always
yeah.
a pleasure. You always got a great sense of humor, so it's a lot of fun.
Thank you again, Brian. It's been a pleasure, and I, this
No, that's
was really, really great. I really think that this is we are leaning towards a future where people are going to become more self-aware, and I do have to get going, but
yeah.
thank you so much for your
I
time.
want to let you go.
Yeah,
So no,
all
I
good.
thank you. I agree. I agree. We're in a generation where we have a lot of opportunity for change, and the personal development school has been a game changer for both Thomas and I. Guys, I want to thank you so much for joining us today. Thomas, man, this was a lot of fun. We will definitely do this again. I absolutely want to talk to you again here and learn some more about you. But Guys, I want to thank you for joining us. I hope that you enjoyed the show as much as I did. Join us every Wednesday. We're going to be releasing a new show, and I look forward to seeing you guys. Again, like us, follow us, subscribe, leave some comments, and the best thing you can do is share this information with your friends and family. Thank you for joining us today on the My Relationship Fail podcast. We'll see you next week.